Welcome to 80s TV Ladies, part of the Weirding Way Media Network.
A quick note for our listeners. We sometimes create our shows very close to the episode drop date, and yet many other interviews are recorded months in advance. This episode was created and recorded before the Writers Guild strike happened. And I want to note that SAG-AFTRA has also now gone on strike, and both strikes are very necessary action for the entertainment industry, and I believe for the United States, perhaps even worldwide. Without the labor of the writers and actors from the 1980s and those currently on strike now, the shows we cover on this podcast would not exist. There would be nothing to talk about around water coolers or around our earbuds. Without the past strikes where writers and actors gained not just vital compensation, but health care and pensions, the creative talent behind these shows and characters we love would never have been able to create careers out of bringing us these moments. We here at 80s TV Ladies stand in support of the writers and actors strike and all the labor movements and unions who are currently challenging massive corporations in order to demand respectful working conditions as well as equitable compensation for labor. So cheers to a hot labor summer, and please check our description for links where you can support the writers and actors and everyone affected by the strike.
80s TV Ladies, so sexy and so pretty.
Sharon Johnson. Welcome to 80s TV Ladies, where we explore female-driven television shows from the 1980s and celebrate the people who made them.
And I'm Susan Lambert-Haddam. Thank you, listeners, for joining us here at the 8TL. It's a Living is an 80s show you may have forgotten or never heard of, but it ran for 120 episodes. And if you check it out, it just may be your new favorite undiscovered gem.
It's a workplace comedy with an interesting history. It was first a network show from 1980 to 1982, and then came back as a syndicated show from 1985 to 1989.
And while it didn't launch the career of actress Anne Jillian, it did make her a star and turn her into an 80s sex symbol.
The show is set in an upscale restaurant at the top of the Bonaventure Hotel in Los Angeles and centers on the lives of the women who work there. But before we get to It's a Living, we want to introduce two very special guests joining us today on the show. Renowned TV writers and producers Jane Espenson and Drew Greenberg.
Jane Espenson grew up in Ames, Iowa, watching too much TV. She went to UC Berkeley, where she studied linguistics and wrote spec scripts for Star Trek: The Next Generation. She was in the Disney Writers Fellowship Program and worked on sitcoms like Dinosaurs and Ellen. Her first staff job on a drama was on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She is a writer and producer for so many beloved shows, from Gilmore Girls to Once Upon a Time, from Battlestar Galactica to Jessica Jones.
Drew Greenberg grew up in New Jersey, Chicago, D.C., and San Francisco. After graduating law school, he did the most obvious thing, moved to L.A. to become a TV writer. He got a job on Buffy the Vampire Slayer off a spec script and went on to write and produce so many great TV shows like Firefly, Smallville, The O.C., Dexter, Arrow, and Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., most of which I have watched in terms of all of those shows, I have to admit. Not all of them, but most of them.
Doing better than I am.
Welcome to the show, Jane and Drew. Thank you so much for joining us here at 80s TV Ladies.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We're very excited to talk with you because our favorite topic of conversation in general is television.
So Jane, I'm going to start with Jane because I know you more than Drew. How did you end up writing awesome TV shows?
I grew up watching television in the 70s and 80s, and it looked like a happy, fun, creative place to be. I always felt that I could watch an episode of MASH and then imagine an episode of MASH or Barney Miller or whatever show it was. And so I read an article, like in TV Guide, I think, or similar, about MASH. And one of the writers, a woman writer on that show, saying that writers sent in spec scripts. It just light bulb, like, oh my God, that's the career I want. And I went to school for other things, but always had in the back of my mind, that I wanted to write spec scripts and get jobs in TV. And so when I was sort of in grad school and I realized that the wheels weren't really taking me forward, that I would try that instead, and started, writing spec scripts for Star Trek Next Generation. They brought me into pitch. I sold some ideas, and then it launched me on this career.
Jane, would you mind explaining for those in our audience that aren't aware what a spec script is?
Well, they don't really need to worry about it because it's kind of gone. It's a thing that used to be, and that's not really a thing anymore, which is the way you'd audition to get into TV writing was you would write an episode of a show that already existed, and use that as your calling card. Now you write a spec pilot. So you have to create a show and write the pilot episode for it, which just really wasn't a thing when I started, and is a very different task. You don't see any possibility it might swing back at some point towards no, because there's so many shows now that you can't. There are so few shows that you would expect any possible reader to be familiar with, even a big hit show. So that person may not happen to watch it because there's just too many options. Also, everything's arc driven now, which makes it harder to write a sort of sample standalone episode. You could write a standalone Barney Miller or even a Star Trek Next Generation like I did, or the Roseannes or Frasers that I used to get started, or Seinfeld. It's harder to do that with Game of Thrones.
And Drew, what about you? What was, tell us about your journey towards television writing. I mentioned a little bit in the bio, but it sounds like a good story.
I mean, it entertains me. I don't know if it'll entertain anybody else. And very much like Jane, I also really I loved watching TV when I was growing up, and sort of got lost in that world a lot, and also had that experience of watching a show and sort of imagining what other stories could be. But I never thought that was a road that a person should go down for their life or career or anything like that. I went to law school, and first semester finals, I needed a study break to keep myself sane. And I had read that there was one TV show on the air that would let you submit a spec without having an agent, and it was Star Trek. And just like Jane did, I said, well, I'll try that. And because, I'm a Star Trek nerd. So what really ended up happening was that instead of writing my Star Trek becoming the break for studying the finals became the break in between writing Star Trek. And it was, I had a lot of fun. I sent it off and I didn't think anything of it. And then about 9 months later, I got a big package in the mail inviting me to come down and pitch. Unlike Jane, I never sold them a pitch. But just getting to have that meeting was exciting. And I had a couple of meetings, and one of the writers on Deep Space Nine said, well, I'm not going to buy anything that you're selling. I said, okay. And he said, but you're good at this. If you want me to talk to you for a little bit about what you need to know to make this a career, I'll sit with you and talk to you. And he did. That was Renee Echeverria, and he sat with me for an hour and just kind of told me what I needed to know about how to make writing a career. And it was the most, wonderful thing anybody had done for me at that point.
That's fantastic.
It was really nice.
I didn't realize you'd had that with Renee. Renee was the one I eventually, I pitched a lot at TNG. They never made one of those episodes, or I never got to write one of them. They bought a premise. But I eventually got to write a Deep Space Nine, and Renee Echeverria was the one who rewrote me, and was also extremely kind, kept me in the loop, would call me, what do you think about this title? Like, extremely welcoming. And yeah, we may only both be here because of Renee Echeverria.
Wow.
Right? And I have a feeling we're not the only ones. I think that he has created a whole lot of the current TV writing force out there.
He was his own fellowship.
Yeah.
It was.
That is so cool that you both, I guess Star Trek was one of the one show that took spec scripts and took spec pitches and stuff. So
then they had the Disney Writers Fellowship, which was my next step, was to go into the fellowship.
And can you talk a little bit about that? Because it was the early days of the fellowship. It had just started.
Yeah, the third year of the fellowship. And it still exists. ABC, Disney, they sort of keep changing the name, writing fellowship, writing whatever it is. And it's a great open door. When I got in, they were explicitly looking for people who weren't in LA. It was really diverse in all ways. They were looking for women, for cultural and ethnic diversity, and also for like people who lived in Louisiana or something and wouldn't otherwise be able to make a try. Now it's become much more people who are already in LA, already working toward being working TV writers. It's a great program still, though. It's at the time, it was the only one that paid you. The Warner Brothers one, you paid them, I believe. I don't know what the current status is of that, but it really allowed people without resources to come here and start doing the things you need to do to make the career happen.
That is fantastic. And I love a lot of the shows that you worked on because I also knew someone, Tim Doyle, in the fellowship program.
Yes.
And so you guys were kind of coming up together, I think.
Yes, Tim Doyle was in the fellowship program from the first year of it. So he was 2 years ahead of me. He was also a writer in Dinosaurs, which was where the fellowship placed me. So I don't know if he helped get me into that room, but I know he hired me on Ellen 5 years later when I desperately needed a job. Tim Doyle was very, very helpful to me.
All right. So Jane, when I sort of emailed you and said, hey, do you want to come talk on my podcast about 80s television? You were like, can we talk about It's a Living? Why did that come up?
Well,
instantly.
Drew and I have two very good, very close friends, Tom Lieber and Christine Boylan. And the four of us do a lot of texting. And when the lockdown first started, somebody, and I don't even remember who it was, said we should all do something together to keep ourselves entertained. And somebody said we should do a group rewatch of It's a Living. And I cannot find those emails. Drew, did you find those?
I didn't. The only thing I remember is that we certainly had talked about it before, right? Like the four of us said, like it had come up as a thing we fondly remember.
Yeah. So you watched it at the time. So I'd love you to talk about your memory of watching it at the time, each one of you.
I'm about 10 years older than Drew, I think. So we had probably different experiences of it.
Only chronologically.
So I watched it. Premiered in 1980, and I was 16. So it was very much like I got all the sexy jokes, but it was still a bit naughty, and it was so sophisticated. My favorite aunt lives in LA. My dad's from LA. We would spend our summer vacations in LA, and LA to me sort of was sophisticated, and we would go out to fancy dinners, and it felt like a trip to LA. Although the establishing shots, that sense of Los Angeles, the shot of the hotel, the lounge music that tells you you're in a classy joint, like it was always a place where I genuinely felt like a place I wanted to go, other than a lot of other shows. It really, to me, had a sense of place.
And Drew, what do you remember?
It's funny because yes, as only a hair younger than Jane was, I wasn't getting any of the sexy jokes at all. But it was part of, and I should have looked this up before we started talking. I actually don't remember where it aired on the ABC schedule when it was on ABC. But I know that it was part of the aesthetic that was what I always felt like a bit of an odd kid because I would be watching Soap and Benson, like the shows that weren't necessarily aimed at my age, but were a little bit about something else. And I don't think I always got the something else they were about. And I certainly enjoyed that kind of like feel that there was something bigger going on than like, did Mike hide the fact that he had a party while Jason and Maggie were away? So like, I think that it sort of fell into that bucket for me, that it was something that seemed like it was about something. And also, yes, like Jane, I also sort of just loved the setting of it. Like it just seemed very sophisticated. It seemed like a workplace comedy, which appealed to me as well back then. And the workplace was one that seemed very fancy. And I don't know, I kind of found myself drawn to that, much as I do now in real life. So yeah.
I looked up, I found the original review of Tom Shales in the Washington Post when it hadn't yet premiered. And it was part of the new fall breed of sexy network comedies. Like it was specifically like, this is going to be a sexy show. Oh, and he called it a female taxi. So it was that workplace
That's actually
comedy.
a great description.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's something.
he calls Whit Thomas Productions witless, tasteless productions.
Really?
Wow.
Yes. Well, this is like before, I think he's referring to like Blossom. Whit Thomas, Soap, Benson, Empty Nest, Blossom, and Golden Girls. Not all of them are, I'm trying to look at them, go, which of those would you call witless and tasteless? Maybe Empty Nest and Blossom? I don't know.
And didn't they, with Thomas too, in like the 70s, didn't they have like, wasn't Soap theirs?
Yeah, Soap is them.
Right?
Certainly not witless. I guess you could call Soap tasteless because it specifically was designed to push the envelope.
That was the point of it.
Yeah, that was the point of it. And this is Whit Thomas before, or at least without Harris. But It's a Living did have a female co-creator, this Jenna McMahon, which was a pen name for Mary Virginia Skinner, who was a Carol Burnett show writer.
Whoa.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Wow.
That's amazing.
She also co-created The Facts of Life.
I did know that.
Yeah.
But why did she have a pen name? Was it just...
I don't know. Her name was Mary Virginia Skinner, and she worked as Jenna McMahon, a whole entirely different name. I don't know.
That's a good little tidbit. I love that she created Facts of Life. I'm really interested in sort of learning more about her, and it will be a show at some point I'd like to look at.
As different as The Facts of Life is from It's a Living, I actually almost remember us maybe even talking about this, that there are also similarities between the two. And, like certainly you're talking about two shows that in a culture where it probably wasn't done that much, they took on what women are facing day to day in a very realistic but funny way. I think maybe two different stages of life, but I think they both at least attempted at first to try to handle some of that. It's kind of fascinating to hear that there was that connection.
And so I'm interested because, again, on rewatching it, what struck you as working, not working?
Well, should we talk about the archetypes, Drew? This is a show with archetypes.
It's a show with archetypes. Yes.
Yeah. It's like, here are 5 different women. Wait, is it 6 if you count Nancy? Or is
6
it 5?
Nancy, that's right.
6 if you count Nancy. So these are 6 different women, which is too many.
And they dropped one, right? For season 2. They let one go away because it let 2
go away and brought in one new one. So it was a net lost one, which is them definitely trying to correct course. But they did a terrible job of it because the one they brought in wasn't working. But at the time, Drew, do you remember you sent this email where you said, there's a world where you can map the archetypes here to the classic Golden Girls, Sex and the City, Facts of Life, Designing Women, Living Signal, Desperate Housewives model. Cassie is man-hungry, Blanche Samantha Blair. Lois is grounded POV character Dorothy Carey Joe. Jan is smart Alex, Sophia, Miranda, Natalie, etc. But they've taken the wide-eyed innocence of Rose, Charlotte, Tootie and split her into 2 parts, Daffy Dot and Naive Vicky. And that we found as we watched, we all had the same reaction. In one of my emails, I said, they're moving Dot and Vicky around the chessboard like they're 2 pawns taped together. They have this very similar characters, and then they gave them B stories together consistently. They wouldn't even split them up. So that it was clear they had one too many.
Yeah, and they couldn't develop into something else because they were just being used the same way.
Yeah, exactly. If they'd split them up, they could have at least said, oh, let's give Dot a whole bunch of LA things. Let's give her crystals and yoga and stuff. But they just kept putting the 2 perky innocents, or at least bubbly people together. Got to split them up, guys.
That's exactly right. Dot was sort of the aspiring actress, right? And Vicky was the wide-eyed innocent who came from a farm.
She was literally in overalls in the pilot.
She was literally in overalls in the pilot. That's exactly right. Bright blue cobalt overalls. Wait, overalls nonetheless.
Yeah.
The kind you wear on a farm.
Everyone was wearing stuff that told you who they were, unless they were in uniform, which mostly they are in a dazzling array of By the end of episode 3, you'd see 4 different waitresses.
That was what struck me because I watched, I haven't yet been able to explore the whole thing. I haven't done a full rewatch. I'm so impressed that you did with a group of people during COVID. Such a genius move. But I was struck by how many outfits they had. And they started off very sexy outfits. They looked like nightclub girls.
They even commented on it in the pilot. Like, you came to work dressed in your uniform. Isn't that a little suggestive for out on the street? Jane was the one, if I recall correctly, in our emails, Jane was the one who figured out what purpose the different, because we were all saying, like, why are they wearing, what restaurant has 4 different uniforms that they all coordinate and wear at random times? Jane, I think, was the one who figured out that that's how on TV you can figure out when it's a new day. When you're working that kind of setting. She's genius.
And the pink and purple ones seem to be the lunch uniforms, and the black and white ones are the dinner uniforms. So you immediately know if it's a new day, and you also know if you're day or night, even though you're interior in a place without windows that are giving you a lot of clues. So it really worked for them. And I think the ones in the pilot are different because it was the pilot. You can tell there was a note. Those are too sexy. We're going to get letters. Tone them down.
Had different ones depending on character too. So there was one scene in particular, it felt like, oh, she's in the one shoulder, she's in the midrib. Like, it was just an interesting. It's like, oh, are they just doing that to again identify character because there's so many women to follow, or is it like the actresses were like, no, I'm not wearing that, like Bridesmaids or something?
Those are the ones we called mixed swim because they're like all the different kinds of swim tops you can get. And I suspect they were chosen to flatter the actresses and reveal character. And you can never tell if there's an actress going, I won't wear that. But these girls were up for wearing those real skimpy ones in the pilot. They seemed happy to wear whatever.
I thought the cast was really amazing. And of course, particularly Jillian just really pops out. But I thought that, was it Susan
Sullivan? She was my favorite. And I was very unhappy when I got to season 2 and saw that she was gone.
It was the first one to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's Susan Sullivan and very young fellow who went on to voice work, and Jillian and Wendy Shaw and Gail Edwards and Miriam
Mercer. Love her too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. These are great. These are all really good performers. But yes. And Jillian is a gosh darn star.
She seems like a secret weapon on this show, where even on the occasions when a line doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense or isn't as funny as it could be, you can hand her the line clearly and she would make it funny somehow. And as a writer, that's always a gift, because you never you always want your words to be in the hands of someone who's going to make it better. And she's one of those actors who does make it better, I think.
Yeah. I again, she just really pops. But they were all really, really amazing. I was very impressed with sort of each of them, even if it felt like maybe they didn't have a lot of places to go. And it's funny, I said the same thing. Rich and I were watching it, and I was like, there's too many characters. He's like, but they're very well defined. I'm like, but it's a lot of ladies in the room. Although I usually like a lot of ladies in the room, I was very impressed by that it was about them.
It sure
most
is.
of the time.
2 men in the whole show, and I don't think the chef has a line in the pilot.
That's right.
Sonny only sings that in the pilot, or if he has lines, he doesn't have many of them. They are clearly setting out. There are only women here that are going to be real people.
Yeah, I kept wondering what Sonny's purpose was. He just didn't seem to really matter in terms of whatever stories they were telling.
He's an irritant. He's someone to provoke them. And he's going to reliably sexually harass at least one of them per episode.
Very sure.
And then they actually do a very good job with him. They make him sympathetic. He gets a couple episodes where he's in the spotlight, and he manages to generally be horrible again by the end. But Paul Knepel plays that character. We adore him. I think Sonny, not a character you could make likable now, but given the mores of the time, he's got his own charm.
Well, and I was also surprised about like the musicality of it. I think that he was also they do a lot of musical numbers. They literally do a dream sequence, and they're like pulling out the top hats, and a lot of crazy performances by everybody. And I thought that they use music in a really interesting way. I mean, he is singing in every show, right? Practically.
Yes, and pretending to play the piano. He doesn't play the piano. They've got a guy hidden under the piano.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. And also, it felt like every episode somebody slams his fingers with the piano, with the
Great running gag.
They use it every time, every episode.
But it never occurred to me that he was singing or that he was playing the piano. I just assumed that he was faking it the whole time. I don't know. It just seemed to make sense, I guess. Or maybe because I just wanted him gone. So...
I was just going to say the original review slammed him, saying like, this is just Bill Murray's lounge singer character from Saturday Night Live, which was at the same time.
I think he's a lovely actor, and I like him as an actor. I just don't think the character had anything to do. But at the same time, you're like, oh, that's fine. He's not the point.
I was just thinking of this as we're talking about it now, but I think he's a good example of what we were willing to put up with then and make funny. And now I think obviously some of us would try very hard to rethink the way that character is presented, and even to the extent that he did awful things in the original show. I do think it's also interesting that he wasn't the point of the show, and that they really did keep the focus on the women, and I don't know how common that was back then. Like he was right, he served a very he was irritating, and they never, even though as Jane said, they humanized him as the show went on, but then always brought him back to being the guy that he was. And they never lost sight of the fact that, he's a dude in this world of women, and he's not like the leader. He's not the daddy figure. He's the one that they outsmart and have to get around. And there's something about that I think is interesting from a sociological point of view.
Yeah, Sonny never wins. Even when if the best thing that Sonny can do is grudgingly earn a brief moment of respect before
losing
he goes
it
back to having his finger slammed in the piano.
Well, and I love that the boss was a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was really impressed by that. It could have been the chef yelling at them. It could have been a male maitre d' kind of figure. In the pilot, I was excited about where that character could go. But just the fact that it's women working for a woman was neat.
Well, it wasn't a time where in most shows that they would take a character who's an antagonist, which is essentially what her purpose was. And they might give them some moments of humanity, but everybody sort of stayed in their box to a large extent. Because I think that's what the audience expected, especially with episodic shows, as opposed to shows that these days have more of an arc to them. But nevertheless, I'm a big fan of hers, and I was thrilled to see her in this. I don't think I watched it when it aired originally. I think I probably was watching Magnum PI, at least first season, because that's what it was on against. In the days before, VCRs and such, you had to pick. Sorry.
It struggled along and went quickly to syndication.
But it did well in syndication. So in the reruns, that's why it came back, right? Just like 27 episodes they had made, and then did so well that then they wanted to produce more episodes for syndication directly.
Which in and of itself was unusual at that time, was it not?
I don't have the specifics on it, but I think you're right. I think that was definitely more of the exception to the rule. But I also feel like, and again, I'm doing this without having the research in front of me, I feel like It's a Living in syndication was probably just at the forefront of that wave of first run syndication that happened in the late 80s.
Yeah.
And I think that was both like action dramas and also multicam half hours. I think that this was part of that wave, or at the forefront of it, if I'm not mistaken.
What's the Robot Girl show?
Right, Small Wonder.
Yeah.
Small wonder, yes, that kind of show started coming along, and Yeah, first run syndication. And this one had junked, but then fit in with those shows that were made to be syndicated. I know there are some other shows. Webster went to syndicated at the end, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Oh, 9 to 5, the TV show, and Charles in Charge.
Charles and
Okay.
makes sense.
Charles in
Started
Charge.
out on CBS and ended up there. Baywatch was a good example of one that started on NBC and ended up becoming a huge international hit in syndication instead.
And I believe Making a Living is the title that they put on it in syndication, because you'll often see this show listed as Making a Living. Our rewatch got to that fantasy musical episode, and we were all like, that was one of the best episodes ever. Can't wait to keep watching. And then we never watched another episode. So I don't think we watched past episode 10, but we had watched a lot to that point. I feel like we patted ourselves on the back
For having achieved that.
We did quite a bit.
I was going to say, well, what other takeaways did you like? I'm just curious what else the group saw in that show as you were watching it.
You see a lot of like how things have changed and how things have stayed the same. There were some jokes in there where I was like, oh, I've written that same joke and used it last week. So there were some definitely where you're like, oh, things haven't changed much. And then there are other things where you're like, oh gosh, bringing an episode back to status quo every week. Boy, that feels old fashioned now. I don't know, Drew, what did we take away?
Obviously we talked about sort of Ann Jillian and Marion Mercer and sort of appreciating them. I think that was a big part of what we talked about. One of the things I remember, other than that, again, if you look at it in the context of when this was airing, when episodic sitcoms were very much one thing, this was a show that wasn't afraid to have this sort of like ribbon of tartness weaving through it, even among the heightened, your heightened reality of the multi-cam world. It still allowed these moments of grounded realness and disappointment and even sadness to creep in, even at the end of an episode. Sonny finding out that the kid isn't really his kid, and Jan almost getting back together with her ex-husband and not. And like, I don't expect that from a typical half-hour circa early 1980s. And it's one of the things that surprises me a little bit about Thomas Shales' review that you brought up, Jane. Like, I suppose he was working off the pilot only, which is its own thing. But to me, the show had a level of groundedness that surprised me, even amidst all the sort of noise and hyperbole of a multi-cam sitcom. I think that was something that I remember striking me a little bit.
Yeah, it certainly could. There were episodes that did, episodes that didn't. You could see it changing season to season as the writing staff changed, and as we should talk about sort of the misfire that we sort of felt season 2 was, where they lost their way and then they found their way back in season 3.
That's right.
So what do you think misfired in season 2?
Well, they got rid of Vicky and Lois, and they brought in Maggie, which was Louise Lasser. And Louise Lasser has a very specific vibe, which is very low energy. That's sort of where her comedy comes from. And is low energy what you want on your hard driving working girl sitcom?
No, the answer is no.
No.
You could tell that they were afraid the show was too sexy. So, these girls all look like prostitutes. Well, let's show them with wholesome. Let's bring in an older woman who's a widow, recently widowed. Her husband's only dead a year. So we'll have a little funny grief. We'll go home with her a lot. She can nurture the girls and she can be dumb as a plank. And it just was not the show that you wanted to see, these bright young things in a show that felt like show business. The show, the opening theme was sung like a big Broadway number. The opening shot of the credits is them walking practically in a kick line down the street. The song references showbiz. The backstage area of the restaurant is where we see them getting ready to go out and perform when they're waiting. It feels like a show about young chorus girls. And then you bring in this sort of grieving mom figure, and it's not the show.
And also, again, if people would just follow the formula, it's very easy, right? Just follow the Sex and the City, Golden Girls, Facts of Life, Living Single, Designing with the Formula. It's very easy, everybody. And what they did was so they lost Vicky, who was conflicting with, who took up space that Dot needed. Great. But then they gave Maggie both the sort of like wise mom role and also the, as Jane said, dumb as a plank role. So like, well, now we're back to mixing our, like, and it didn't, I'm fine with mixing, I mean, I kid, about the formula thing. Fine, mix up the formula, but don't give your maternal character who's grieving also, don't make her the butt of your dumb jokes. Like, that is very hard to pull off. And you can sort of see like they were trying something, and good for them for trying it, but it was, I guess in practice, not super successful in that way.
Yeah. You could feel them just trying to fit her into this show, and she's just not the show.
Like in the first season, it was so impressive how punchy it was, right? How funny it was and perky it was. But also like the episode where they have the sleepover and then Beef comes in and they sort of, that was brilliant and had a lot to say about what it was to be women. They were like, we can do this. And I thought that was just very, very clever. And it felt aware. The show felt aware that they were a bunch of women and they were also being funny. It had the moment, it did have that Golden Girls element. Now that once you mention it, I sort of won't stop thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I think I'm doing this again a little bit from memory, but if I'm not mistaken, some of that punch felt a little muted in season 2 to my ear. And it's very clear that somebody was trying to pull the show. Like, so much of the time you get direction from network executives or studio executives or whoever, who end up giving you the note. And so you try to pull the show in a different direction, and it doesn't always work. And I think one of the things that made the show really pop, and I think is one of the reasons why for some of us it stands out as like a cult classic, is because it had that sort of like, it said something about what it was like to be 5 or 6 working women, in the world. And I feel like that got a little bit dampened a little bit.
And you could tell that it wasn't just trying to fit her into it that made it feel less sexy. You could tell that making it less sexy was definitely the mandate, because they took away Cassie's edge. And you've got gold, you've got Mae West, and you're trying to make her, I don't know what's the non-sexy Mae West. There's nothing.
Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farms.
Yeah, yes,
she does become more wholesome, I think, in the show.
Yeah,
in that second season.
And that's not the point.
Exactly right.
Oh my gosh! All right, we're going to take a little break and then come back and kind of finish talking about that, and maybe talk about some of the other shows you guys have worked on and iconic female characters. We'll be back after the break.
We actually kept talking during the ad break, so here's a little snippet of that conversation that I think you will enjoy.
So how are you, Jane?
I'm really good. How are you? How's Rich? You guys doing good?
This is my sister Ann, who's
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm huge fans of both Drew and Jane. So, and Sharon now that
Hi,
I've been
Annie.
a super fan of 80s TV Ladies, with my favorite podcast.
Oh, thank you so much.
So I'm thrilled to hear you guys talk about one of my favorite sitcoms, It's a Living.
Well,
wow.
I know that I have heard Rich talk about both of you sisters, because it seems to me like when you're in Atlanta, you take him to a place called Piggy Barbecue.
We do.
Piggy Barbecue.
There's a little song about Piggy Barbecue,
Yeah.
which basically goes Piggy Barbecue, Piggy Barbecue, Piggy Barbecue. And so you sing it and you eat it. It's delicious.
And yeah, Rich told this whole story about how he got all excited to go to Piggy Barbecue.
It's actually in Spartanburg, South Carolina, but it's worth the side trip of an hour and a half to go get it. It's perfect.
My God. But he said, but then you pull up at the place and he realizes after all that setup, the whole song and everything, the place isn't even called Piggy Barbecue.
No, it's called Carolina Barbecue.
But it does have a little pig.
It is a little pig on there.
It does have a little pig.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
From that story, I feel like I know you ladies. You know.
Well, I know you all from your writing, your wonderful writing that I love so much. So many great television shows. And yes, this It's a Living makes me so nostalgic.
Yeah.
And Jillian should have had the career that, I don't know, somebody else should have had. What is she doing now? Do we know?
She was very ill. She had that breast cancer thing, and you can see it starting in season 3 or 4. She looks unwell, and I think that's probably maybe why we stopped watching when we did. Is it started feeling a little sad?
You might be right.
I think that probably took her off track a bit.
But she's currently a motivational speaker and goes and does speaking events a lot. So we hope to get her on the show.
Yes, maybe we'll have to get Ms. Jillian on.
That's a great idea.
Jane, I have a question for you. Just you mentioned something that I'm not sure maybe our listeners will understand. It was also very interesting. Getting the show back to baseline. Is that what you said?
Status quo.
Yeah, at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that. Yeah, TV used to be episodic in that you'd come back next week and all the learned lessons would be forgotten. Everyone would be the way The Simpsons. Everyone's always the same age, and things just return to where they were. There's not a ton of arcing
Because there wasn't streaming, there wasn't DVRs or VCRs. So people missed a week. They had to still come back and be able to watch, I suppose, maybe.
Well, that makes sense. And they didn't want them to come back and feel that they'd missed something that they weren't ever going to be able to see. So it would make sense that would be the reason they would do that.
Also, you would rerun the episodes all summer long. So, and they always told us, write these episodes so they could air in any order. So if there were a network preemption because the football game went long or something and an episode dropped big, you got to be able to follow.
And now we'll actually take an ad break.
Welcome back. We're still here talking with Jane Espenson and Drew Greenberg about It's a Living. And we're also going to hopefully get a chance to talk to them a little bit about things that they've worked on. So welcome back, everyone.
All right. We were talking about female characters and the iconic female characters. As a writer, as a creator of shows, what are the ingredients when you're building those characters, particularly for building iconic women?
I have always tried to write characters who could be women or not. That instead of trying to think of them as a female character, just think of them as a person. Because I think you fall into a lot of subconscious traps. Even as a woman writing women, you'll subconsciously make them slightly less active. Unless you start thinking, oh, what if a man played this part? You suddenly see, oh my God, I see the trap I fell into. That's a little trick I do is try to recast the roles in your head, switch them around gender-wise, and make sure everybody still feels like a human being.
I think that's the smartest thing. I remember Jane talking about that when we first met on Buffy. And I remember I said, yes, I do. Like I can hang with her. Once I'd written my spec episodes that got me on Buffy, I had written a spec pilot as well. And I remember very specifically writing in teenage. There was one of the leads of that show was a teenage girl. And I remember thinking when I wrote it, I mean, yes, the fact that she's a girl is important to her experience, but I wanted to do whatever I could since I'm not a teenage girl. I wanted to try to write her from as objective a point of view as I could. It's very similar to what Jane was saying. And I would try to just make sure that if she became a teenage boy, that the same problems would apply. It's funny, as I start developing shows now, again, I even feel funny talking to all of you about all this stuff as I am not a TV lady myself. But I do my best just to make sure that anytime that I've got a woman that I'm writing, I want to make sure that she is flawed and also, right? Like she's not unnecessarily evil and she's not an angel, that she's got real things she has to work through so that she gets her own story, her own agency, that she has her own stuff that she can deal with and make her just as much of a force as any male character on the show. And sometimes that means what's the story you can tell with her that you couldn't tell with male characters. And sometimes that's kind of fun too, but it's always important to make sure that she gets to stand on her own 2 feet and have her own story as much as any male character on the show.
And flawed, you said flawed, that's so important. I think so often people think they're doing you a favor by making the woman smart and no, not like, oh, she's the grown up in the room, which just means she's the one going like, hey, everybody stop having fun. And it's like, this is not helping us. Let her be flawed. I love drunken bad leader Cersei. Like usually in the effort to make sure women are depicted as good leaders, they're always depicted as flawless leaders. That was something I loved on Battlestar was that President Roslin rigged that election. It's like, just like a man, you're going to have good days and bad days where you're on the right and wrong side of the moral balance sheet.
I love that.
If you look at like recent television, a really good example is that sort of peak of difficult men, the shows that, were like Sopranos and Mad Men and then Breaking Bad, where the women so often had to take on the role of gatekeeper, and were there. And Breaking Bad is an amazing show, one of my favorite shows of all time, an amazing portrayal of Skylar, who got eaten up by the fans because they felt that she was standing in the way of their hero, who really wasn't the hero at all, right? Of Walter White, because she had morals, because she was a good person. So I thought it was genius when they did Better Call Saul that Kim Wexler could have been the same thing, but it's that they gave her own past, her own flaws, that she fell into the same traps and yet had a different point of view on it than Jimmy did. And I feel like that's a good example of, okay, you try it this way. Oh, we see what happened here with the audience. Let's try this. And, to me, that's exciting stuff when we get to be fully three-dimensional and complicated and have reasons for doing what they do. That's the way it should be, right? Like,
what I was thinking about just the other day, and I want to get you guys' temperature on it. I was thinking about that episode of The West Wing that I think is called These Women. And at the time I loved it. And I look back now and think, wait, was that incredibly patronizing? Where it was like this defining shot of the episode is the men looking at the female characters and going, man, they're aces. And now I just feel like that seemed good at the time, but boy, I'm not sure that wore well. Am I remembering that right?
You are remembering correctly. I am a huge West Wing fan, and I have the exact same reaction to that episode now as well. It just, yeah, good intention, I guess, but not great execution. Whatever he was going for.
It seemed good. The things change in the world, and you look back and you go, oh no, look what happened.
I feel like when people say, we play the game sometimes in a writer's room where you go around the table and you say, all right, what's the thing you could give a TED Talk on? And the only thing I have is The West Wing. And so I'm obsessed with it. And also I have the same experience too, Sharon, that you had, where you look back now at the things, it's,
yeah.
I just so it's the time. Well, no, don't say that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that in 80s television too.
Oh, absolutely. Stuff that at the time you were like, oh, wow, I'm glad someone finally said it. And you look back now and you go, oh, wait, what was I rooting for? I wasn't on the right side of this issue. Yeah. And I think that a young person now watching It's a Living would probably have a very different reaction because it doesn't have the nostalgia for them that it does for us. We look at Sonny pinching the girls' butts or whatever he's doing, and we go, oh, that's Sonny, because we remember that's how we reacted then. And if we watched it for the first time now, I think we'd be slapping poor Paul Kreppel's face.
It's also that we bring the context of the time. We remember what the times were like.
Yeah.
And for that moment, yeah, it was pretty revolutionary. And yeah, it was a great step forward, but we've taken other steps forward since.
Yeah.
So that step is a little bit further back from where we are now. And I try to be, for lack of a better word, forgiving about those kinds of things because it was great for its time, but yeah, it's not necessarily as great for now.
That's
There's a
right.
great essay written by Molly Ringwald when she rewatched her movies with her daughters. I don't know if you've read it. And she's like, it made me see the movies I made in such a different light. And so it's a really amazing essay because she talks a lot about John Hughes and how important that relationship was and how much those movies spoke in a language that no one was really speaking for young people. And yet now looking back at it, recognizing just how horrific so many things were that were in those and considered really funny. And so it's a really, really fascinating article. I recommend it.
A friend of mine just did a rewatch of Crocodile Dundee, and he was like, remember how funny it was? No, it's terrible. It's anti-trans, like really bad. Like he commits essentially 2 sexual assaults in the course of the movie. Like it's apparently just awful now. You take your eyes off something for a second. It was bad. It's like an avocado.
It's like an avocado. All right. Well, I want to get us back to talking about how you guys met and the show that I love also so dearly. I think it probably holds up well. I haven't rewatched it recently, but I'm sure it does.
It must.
It must.
It must.
Can we talk a little bit? I'm a huge Buffy fan. And so can we talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer and how you guys met and the female characters on that show?
Sure. I was at Buffy before Drew was, and I remember Drew's first day. I was sitting in that fuzzy green chair in Doug's office, and Drew came in and joined us and sat like on the floor next to where I was sitting in the chair. And I was like, oh, it's the new guy. I don't know. I'm having fun with Doug. And then Drew said like 2 sentences, and I was like, oh, this guy's in the act. He's one of us. I'm so happy he's here.
I wonder what I said. What ridiculousness came out of my mouth.
You said something. I don't remember what the setup was, but you said something like, well, I've been called worse. And I was like, oh, he's funny and self-deprecating. And I was charmed.
I will say I had a very similar experience that I came in and right away. Jane was the person who I said, yes, I feel like I can hang with her and I'll be okay. You just, you want to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, funnier than you. And that's Jane for me. So I really, on the very first day, and stepping into especially it was my first staff job, and it was my favorite show, and it's a group of writers who have been together, for a little while at that point.
What season did you come in on?
Season 6. And so it was a little intimidating right there. So Jane was one of the first people who made me feel welcome. And I think a lot of it was bonding over pie, probably, but that was a certainly big part.
You gave me a great joke setup there, and I didn't get in fast enough.
Sorry.
You said I was funnier than you and smarter than you, and it would have done a great thing if I'd said, "Oh, I'm not funnier than you."
I can do it again. We can go back. Back to ones.
I like that you thought of it later.
That's why I'm good at. This is the thing about writing. This is why everyone should do writing instead of talking. Because talking, the moment slips by and you don't say it quite right, blah, blah, blah. Writing, you can always go back and have the great idea right in the right time.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. And no one is the wiser.
Exactly.
They think you had it all the time.
Yeah, exactly. They think you're smarter and funnier. Wow.
Now, Jane, were you on the show from the beginning?
I joined in season 3.
You wrote a lot of episodes.
And we both stayed there till the end. We both went there all the way through 7. Yeah.
What were your favorite characters to write for?
Jonathan. I love a tertiary character. Jonathan and Andrew, Anya, Spike. The hard ones to write are the ones closer to the middle. Buffy's the hardest to write. Angel was hard to write, although he was already moving off the show by the time I was there. Who'd you like to write, Drew?
I always say, like, I could never choose, but I always had a good time writing Anya. Like Jane, I always had a good time writing Anya. Especially, I had a good time writing, like, uncharacteristically angry Anya. That was something that, I don't know, spoke to me for whatever reason. And And I liked that. I liked writing Andrew a lot. I was lucky that he came in when I came in.
Tom Link is so funny. He's one of those ones like you were saying about Jillian. The line doesn't have to be funny. He'll make it fun.
And he'll make it classic. Like that's the thing. Like you can hand him anything and he'll turn it into a comedy classic. And you're like, yep, that's what I meant the whole time.
Yeah, I didn't write in Storyteller. I didn't write vampires or I just wrote vampires, and he said he made it into whatever it is he made it into, and he made comedy out of nothing.
Very, very good.
That's amazing. Why do you think that show and that character hit so big and so hard at the time? I'm curious looking back.
She was written with an authenticity. Like nobody ever questioned her ability to be the leader. I think that was pretty new. Drew, you go. I got to think more.
I was listening to you. That's what I'm saying. I think that's right. I think there's also an element. I'm not saying anything new, but I think there's also an element in there of the character who is by outsiders underestimated. The person who's seen as an underdog, right? And I think we all kind of relate to that in some way. I mean, I think we don't all have. I've very much taken on the approach, especially in the last few years. It's not my job to make everybody in the audience relate to everything about every character. Specifically, when I'm writing gay characters, I don't need straight people to necessarily say, "Oh, yes, that's just like in my life." No, you have plenty of straight characters that you can have in your right. Like this is a gay character for a gay audience. At the same time, if there's something about a character that does speak to things that we all go through, great. Then if you can find something in it, then that's great. And I feel like Buffy didn't have to speak to men as well as women, but I think that Buffy had this sort of like universal quality to her in that she was undervalued by the outside world, that she was considered an underdog, and that people expected less of her. And she rose to the challenge every single time.
Yes, I think that's huge. And at the time we would sometimes there'd be like this basket of fan letters that you could look through. And a lot of teenage girls saying, I only got through high school because of Buffy. And then I feel like a couple years after Buffy ended, all the reactions you would see online were gay men saying, I only got through high school because of Buffy. And I bet there's a lot of trans people getting through high school because of Buffy. And it's like whatever group is feeling undervalued and unseen at the time finds Buffy.
You're right.
It was such an incredible metaphor. I remember from first season, it so struck me. It was like the perfect scene where she's got to go out and stake some vampires because, the world's going to end. And her mom is like, no, you're grounded and you're staying in. And she's like, Mom, you don't understand. And she's like, it's not life or death. You're going to stay in. And you're like, it was the perfect metaphor scene for how you feel in high school, that everything is life and death. And everybody's telling you it's not, or they're not paying attention to you, or they're ignoring you. And that was like kind of the moment I sort of fell for the show and was like, oh, I'm in from here out.
Yeah, I think that scene was the one where there's a line, something like her mom saying, well, have you ever tried just not slaying vampires? Where you're like, oh, this is the closest we ever got to saying there was a gay metaphor here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That spoke to me. Again, I wasn't on the show yet. I was watching it at home as a big fan, and I saw that and because, like, oh, I am seen. I am, like, people know what this is like. As funny as it was too, like, it's hilarious saying that, but you're also like, oh, yeah, I get that.
Yeah. All right. Well, now you guys have worked on shows together since Buffy. What shows have you worked on together?
What have we done, Drew?
Jane was kind enough to invite me to come spend a summer working on Caprica when she was there. I had a break
That's
in between
right.
seasons of the show that I was on, and so I got to go hang out in a room with Jane, a writer's room with Jane for a summer, which was really fun.
And we both worked on Warehouse 13, but at different times.
That's right. Did that separately.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I wish we had been at the same time.
But I feel like there may be some other show where we did. I guess not. Some other show that we both worked on at different. Wait, the OC? No.
Different times, but yes.
Different times. We both worked on the OC at different times.
Yes, I was also just about to say, and Gilmore Girls, and I remembered I never wrote for Gilmore Girls.
Only in your head?
Yeah, just the fanfic. We developed one show together that didn't go anywhere.
That's right.
So far.
That's right. So far. Who knows what we'll do in the future?
That's right. Jane is one of those people also that I feel like I can go to when I've got, I think I just did this last week, when I've got like something and I'm like, help. I just email the pages to Jane and she can take a look at them. And so, that's a different kind of working together.
That's such a great thing to talk about again, I don't know if anybody listening wants to be a writer, but how often incredibly successful writers help each other, like even when they're developing something on their own, or, it's such a lesson to keep using your friends and really smart people in your life to help you all the time.
That's right. TV is really collaborative, but I believe feature writers do this too, that it's just you're cooking for your own taste buds, but your taste buds get exhausted and you need a second opinion. Does this still taste good? Or I can't tell if there's too much salt anymore.
I always find I talk about this a lot, which is when I talk to people who have questions about this, but there's this common misconception that success is a pie and there are only so many slices to go around. And it's definitely not true. Not really true. And it's better to have people around you who know what they're doing, who have done this before, whose opinions you trust, because then you have somebody you can go to when you need help. You can be there for them when they need help, and you can go to them when you need help. And it's so much better than to isolate yourself, especially in TV, which is collaborative. Nobody makes it on their own. It's right. As you got to have people around you whose opinions you trust. I'm very fortunate that I have Jane. I have my brother is a TV writer as well. He's a comedy writer, and so I have people whose opinions matter to me and my trust who have not gotten sick of me yet.
Never,
because you're funny and self-deprecating.
Yes.
Only sometimes.
And kind. Well, this has been amazing.
Yay.
Yeah, thanks. Can't thank you both enough for agreeing to do this and talking to us about It's a Living and everything else TV. It's been great.
Thank you for sharing all your stories with us. I'm so thrilled to meet you, Drew, and any friend of Jane's is now a friend of mine, or I want them to be. But I am always happy to see you, Jane, even through a Zoom window.
You too.
And by the way, thank you for letting me be a part of this. Also, it's been a delight for me as well.
I am just so excited that you guys watched 80s ladies TV during the pandemic. That's how this podcast started. So
awesome.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our audiography for today includes a book, Girl in the Show, 3 Generations of Comedy, Culture, and Feminism by Anna Fields. I also want to shout out the Molly Ringwald New Yorker essay that I mentioned. It's from 2018 called What About the Breakfast Club? Revisiting the Movies of My Youth and the Age of Me Too. It's really interesting. You should check it out. Follow Drew Greenberg and Jane Espenson on Twitter. Drew's at twitter.com/Drew Zachary, Zachary. Jane Espenson can be found at twitter.com/Jane Espenson. And you can watch It's a Living on YouTube.
For more information on the writers and actors strike, please check our description for links on info and how you can help. The terms the WGA and SAG-AFTRA are asking for are not unreasonable, and the fight to win them is existential to the future.
Thank you all for listening. We love hearing from you, so send us your thoughts or questions at our website, 80stvladies.com. That's 80stvladies.com.
And if you want to help support the making of this podcast, please go to patreon.com/80stvladies. You can support us by becoming a patron, and there's special content exclusive for subscribers.
Stay tuned for more episodes in our It's a Living series. We'll be talking about the creators, showrunners, and breakout star Anne Jillian.
In fact, our very next episode is a super fun interview with the ever-charming Paul Kreppel. Yep, who played the lounge singer pianist Sonny Mann for all seasons of It's a Living. He is also a Tony Award winner and still performing, most recently on the tour for Into the Woods. Tune in next time to hear all about it.
We hope 80s TV Ladies brings you joy and laughter and lots of fabulous new and old shows to watch, all of which will lead us forward toward being amazing ladies of the 21st century.
Thanks for listening.